Hello, everybody. Happy Friday. Welcome to Window Watch as we reflect on Norwich City's transfer activity and also look ahead to tomorrow's game against Leicester City as well. We'll be talking about some of the key lines to that game, which probably revolve around two players in particular. Connor Southwell joined by Dave Freezer. If you've got any comments or questions over the next 45 minutes, then do get them in and we'll try and get through as many as we can. I can already see Sonny has got one in, which is good to see. Dave, how are you? It's been an interesting week for Norwich City, hasn't it? Obviously, that defeat against Manchester City last week, which is pretty difficult because the scoreline was harsh. The performance wasn't great, but it's still Manchester City. And we see Manchester United bolster their ranks with certain Cristiano Ronaldo today. So again, just shows the gulf, doesn't it, between the top clubs in the Premier League and those like Norwich City who maybe are at the other end of the spectrum. And then, of course, we had that win against Bournemouth in the Cup. So how do you think the general mood is heading into tomorrow amongst the group? Daniel seemed to imply that maybe spirits have been lifted a little bit.
Yeah, it's difficult not to be after a 6-0 win, isn't it? I think it's been sort of surreal, isn't it, to go from a 5-0 defeat and everyone being in being so down in the dumps to being a 6-0 overwhelming win. Bournemouth were poor, but that could have been 8 or 9-0, really, couldn't it? Norwich completely overran them, and it was just really good fun. It was really rejuvenating, I felt, and there's a really good little photo that Paul got, our photographer Paul Chesterton, and is it Gibson, Pukki, and Aarons in the director's box at the front, and you can just sort of see on their face that they're a little bit like, oh, I wish we were out there. And they were almost a little bit sort of envious of the fact that the new lads had come in and had got this opportunity against a Bournemouth team where you could almost argue that Scott Parker had kind of given up on the game, given the team that he fielded. It was so young, he rested a lot of his young players. And that Pukki was probably thinking, I'd love to be out there and get a couple of easy goals like Sargent's just got. And even Sargent, when I spoke to him after the game, he sort of joked that I've often seen goals scored like that and thought that must be such a nice feeling to just get a nice easy goal. And he got basically 2. I don't even know how he scored the second one, really. So, yeah, I would have thought that has probably just upped the tempo in training that a little bit this week and has got them all in good spirits to now just give it one real good push. Daniel talked today about needing to grind out a result, whether if they could grind out a 0-0, I think you never really want that, but it would be great in the circumstances, wouldn't it? A point and a clean sheet just as a starting point. So they just got to give it everything before going into the international break, which, as I'd imagine we'll come on to, has got a few sort of uncertainties around it, hasn't it? But if they can get anything out of this game that just allows them to build and everybody to go through the international break feeling that bit more positive about what's going to follow.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting tomorrow. Obviously, we kind of had the game against Bournemouth. It was 10 changes from the team that started at Manchester City. It's going to be interesting to see what Daniel Farke decides to do tomorrow, and we'll come on maybe to that in a little while. But we all turn our attentions to transfers. We're not going to be speaking about Cristiano Ronaldo to Manchester United, which is mega, isn't it? I think for the Premier League in general. December, I think we'll see him at Carrow Road, which is quite an exciting prospect. Just generally, obviously we hope he has a stinker that day. But
he's lost at Carrow Road before, isn't he?
He has. Yeah, maybe there we go. There we go. Maybe we can get Adam Drury back in the yellow and green just for a game, because I think he's terrific that day, wasn't he? So yeah, hopefully a repeat of that. But from one Portuguese international to another, Dave, it's provided me with a nice segue into William Carvalho, which was a link that surfaced yesterday morning. Sky Sports put it out there. 68-time Portuguese international, made his career really at Sporting Lisbon, but has played at Real Betis for the last few seasons. Been linked heavily with Arsenal throughout his career. Really, has been linked with a Premier League move for the last 3 or 4 years. I think Wolves are the latest club that have been linked with him as well. Obviously, a club who have utilised sort of Portuguese players predominantly for the last 4 years, really, ever since Daniel Farke came to England. Anyway. What do you make of this one? Because he is a name that lots of people are familiar with. He's played European football. He's a European Championship winner, regular Portuguese international. It's quite an exciting link. And it does sound like Norwich have had a look, but ultimately it seems quite unlikely.
Yeah, it sounds like it's going to be an expensive one, doesn't it? I mean, you say he built his reputation in everything that you said there. I think he's really built his reputation in the BBC Sport gossip column. And I'd imagine he's probably appeared in that hundreds of times over the years. I'm not even joking. He seems to have been linked with every club in England for every transfer window for about 10 years, isn't he? And he's never pitched up here. So that immediately makes you feel a little bit suspicious. I think if there's a deal to be done, if he was up for it and financially it could work, Norwich would probably very much be interested. That sort of experience would be an excellent addition. He, in style, is probably a lot closer to an Ibrahim Amadou than a Billy Gilmour, isn't he? You know, he's big and strong. I don't think he's got a reputation for being particularly quick. Technically fairly proficient, probably of a higher standard than Amadou was. But he's someone that, given it's gone on this long, you wonder whether he is cut out for the Premier League, because no one's ever taken the plunge there. But you don't get that many caps for Portugal and win the Euros and all the things that he's done in his career without being a good player. So, yeah, if he was one that they could add, that would be potentially quite exciting. But just from the start, it's felt like one not to get too excited about, because it just doesn't quite feel like the sort of signing that you expect a newly promoted club to make. And from his point of view, is it the sort of deal that he'd be interested in as well? You'd expect that if he was going to go somewhere, it would be more of a Palace or a West Ham or so, someone a bit more established.
Yeah, he feels like he's been around forever, maybe because of all those appearances in the gossip column. 68 appearances for Portugal, probably several more in those. Only 29. Yeah, I think Sky are reporting a season-long loan. I think they use the term "in talks," which is always relatively vague, isn't it? When we come to that, but that's sort of transfer window jargon that we get used to. It certainly
going
is
to make an offer.
Exactly. Yeah. Advanced stages, all those sort of things. I think we, as we've spoken about on here before, there's a lot of sort of grey matter between interest and a deal being confirmed. I mean, look at Ronaldo today and how that has escalated. For an example, that probably isn't something that's happened in 4 hours. I wouldn't have expected. So it can be interesting, but. Yeah, like I say, it sounds like Betis have wanted to get rid of him all summer. They paid quite a big fee for him, 16 million euros, a few seasons ago with various different clauses and add-ons. So probably significantly more than that. I've seen a few people sort of write about him who have watched a lot more Spanish football than me, who have said that maybe he's not been particularly great in the last 6 months. Probably since January or so. I think he had a major injury a couple of years ago. So maybe would fit the mold in terms of a player that has a lot of potential to fulfill, but maybe has sort of fallen off a little bit. Kind of what we've seen Norwich do before, but on a bigger scale. But in terms of profile, Dave, I mean, we've spoken on here before about a sheer presence in midfield. Carvalho would offer that, wouldn't he? If Norwich City could get something arranged for him, even though, we must stress, it looks very unlikely at this stage.
Yeah, he's a big lad, isn't he? He's more Amadou size than Tete size, and obviously Tete wasn't small, and had a fair bit of physicality about him, and certainly in his latter years at Norwich had really hit the gym pretty hard, hadn't he, and become a bit of a muscle man. But yeah, I mean, we saw Sorensen there on Tuesday night against Bournemouth, and there were a few decent bits and pieces from him in there, but it wasn't a night when you especially needed a defensive midfielder, because Bournemouth, well, after half time, they were pretty pathetic, weren't they? And they gave Norwich 2 goals. So he wasn't desperately needed in that game. There were a couple of times when he swept up nicely, and we'll see how he comes into it. It's just interesting from a starting point that Daniel Farke did play him there. Who knows? Maybe he saw enough to start him against Leicester tomorrow. I don't think that'll be the case. I think it's probably McLean comes in for Rupp. I think most people are expecting that. And I think he'll probably stick with Gilmour in there for the time being, although I do half wonder whether McLean's probably a better bet as the deeper of the if you're going to play in midfield 3. But yeah, Carvalho would certainly come with presence. He would come with a reputation. But as we said a couple of times already, it's one that we sort of felt you don't want to get too excited about.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of those probably that has been presented to them and they've explored it. I think that's maybe the better way of putting it. But Matthias Normann, that one is still very much live. He's still a player of interest. He played this afternoon for Rostov, didn't he? Sonny's given us a nice scout report, so we can read that. He said thinking Normann would be a very astute signing. He's strong, quick, and can put in a good tackle. He's the brick wall Norwich need in the midfield, so that's certainly positive. I hope Sonny's been watching him this afternoon. Normann, it seems to be. I mean, again, we're talking about profiles of players. I can't I can't profess to have watched loads of. I haven't watched any of Matthias Normann, to be completely frank. He plays in the Russian Premier League, so I think anyone who has an encyclopedic knowledge on him, certainly from our perspective, would be exaggerating maybe their understanding of him as a player. But we can only go off sort of YouTube reels, which is probably what the majority of fans will be going off, and obviously the views of people in Norway and Russian journalists as well. But and of course Sonny, who's provided us with an excellent scout report there. It does sound like he's more in the mould of a kind of Ollie Skip, agile, kind of running defensive midfielder rather than Carvalho. So again, we're kind of talking about contrasting profiles of players that Norwich City are looking at, which maybe doesn't marry up to some of the recruitment that we've seen.
He's an interesting one. YouTube supercuts are always very dangerous, aren't they? I'm going back a bit here, but I remember Julian Brellier and Mark Fotheringham turning up on the basis of they look good on YouTube. And I'm sorry to those lads, but they did not do the business for Norwich at all, particularly Brellier. Fotheringham maybe in a few games. He was the captain for a little while as well, wasn't he? But I digress. In those highlights packages, he looks quite similar to Lys Malou to me in the way he's quite athletic and dynamic and similar sort of size. He doesn't look as maybe one-dimensional, but I don't mean that in sort of a critical way, as a Carvalho or a Ibrahim Amadou or maybe even Alex Tettey, where it's a very specific defensive midfielder. That's what they're going to do. They're not necessarily going to be your passing pivot or whatever. This guy looks like he's got a bit more about him than that, doesn't he? He looks like he's someone that wants to get on the ball, wants to get forward, wants to be involved, but is clearly very happy to put his foot in as well. So I don't know, maybe it's sort of a Tom Trybull, Lys Malou hybrid, and perhaps that is what Daniel wants. Maybe the Amadou spell has sort of scarred Daniel a little bit in that he doesn't want someone who's only there to defend and is only there to be a brick wall. He is looking for someone that can do that and will do that, but also is proficient at the technical side of things and the passing side of the games, which is where Amadou failed, really, wasn't it? With the context that he got shunted in defence for a while, and that kind of messed him up. So, obviously they're looking for someone like Oliver Skip, but Oliver Skip's a £20 million player who's now starting for Tottenham, at least 20 million probably, and is probably going to be an England international sooner or later. So it's not easy to find a direct replacement on the budget that they're working with. But if they could get him equally, as with Carvalho, he would seem like a good addition for a newly promoted Premier League team.
Yeah, it doesn't seem this one has progressed at all from when we were speaking about it last week in terms of the differences in the clubs. Of course, Norwich would ideally like to get him on a loan with an obligation to buy, obviously dependent on survival in the Premier League. Rostov, I think, would be open to a loan, providing that obligation was compulsory, irrespective of what division Norwich are in, which obviously won't happen because everyone knows the way Norwich operate. They're not going to be spending 40 million quid on a championship player. They simply don't have the facility to do that. So unless there is some compromise, this one probably is a little bit stuck for now. But Norwich have until Tuesday 11 o'clock to do their business. So we shall see what comes, and that probably feeds into some of the questions we've been getting, Dave. Quite a few along these lines. Jake has said, should we be worried that Norwich haven't been linked with any centre backs considering the deadline is Tuesday? There's another one as well from Alex. At what point do we get worried? Not even had a concrete rumour since Norman over a week ago. Of course, we had Carvalho yesterday, which I think is fair to say that one certainly had an element of truth to it, although I would say it isn't going to happen. Jake as well saying, should I be worried about the lack of links to defensive midfielders and centre-backs? Everyone knows what Norwich City wants. That probably comes with a little bit of a premium in the market. Stuart Webber has said multiple times that Norwich are going to have to be patient. It seems like it's going to be an interesting few days of the window. Norwich really are in uncharted waters. Usually under Stuart Webber and Daniel Farke, business has been done sort of sooner rather than later. So I think we're all watching with intrigue, aren't we, Dave, about how the next few days develop and whether they can get these sort of remaining two players that they desire over the line.
Yeah, the lack of new centre-back links has surprised me a little bit. Obviously, we had Gary Cahill emerge, didn't we? And as we told people fairly quickly, that was a genuine interest. It's just the answer Norwich got was, I'd rather stay in the south, and Bournemouth were interested, so that made more sense, and that's where he ended up. Although I was a bit surprised we didn't see him at Carrow Road on Tuesday night. I'm just going back over my list really, and yeah, of all the players that are linked, and the one who Watford have just signed Mo Sissoko from Tottenham, haven't they? But the other one, it's Watford who've got Ozan Tufan on loan, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
That he was obviously linked with Norwich at some point.
They were also interested in Matthias Normann, obviously the player we've just been talking about earlier this summer, but had a well, I don't know what form it was, but some sort of interest not back. So again, it's clear that I think a lot of clubs do want defensive midfielders at the moment, which is probably making the task a little bit harder for Norwich.
Yeah, and centre back wise, I mean, obviously we know Chris Ayer was one that they wanted, and Brentford ended up gazumping them. There was the lad out in Germany, wasn't there, Sebastian Bornau?
Yeah.
And he ended up with Wolfsburg, didn't he? So
Champions League football, yeah, or
exactly.
it was, yeah.
And the other one linked was Tosin Adarabioyo, wasn't it, at Fulham? So he's not moved anywhere yet, although I think there were some quotes suggesting he was happy to stay with Fulham for the season, weren't there, a few weeks back? So yeah, but as you said a little while ago, things move so quickly at this stage of the window because just look at Cristiano Ronaldo moving between two of the biggest clubs in the world, and it's happened seemingly in a matter of hours. If Norwich get a breakthrough, then they could well get things sewn up pretty quickly. And even though it's a match day tomorrow, you could even hear things breaking on a Saturday. It's going to be an interesting few days. Stuart, as you said, does not like doing things on deadline day. But Daniel once again said in his quotes today, didn't he, that we've been pretty open about this. We wanted a left back, a centre back, and a defensive midfielder. They've got Brandon Williams in. They haven't got the other two in, and he basically was saying trust in Stuart Webber, wasn't he?
Yeah, absolutely. What's your feeling then, Dave? And this is probably based on personal feeling more than anything that we've heard or know. Do you feel that we'll be sat here Wednesday morning with those two players in the building and kind of everyone looking ahead to the season with probably a bit more optimism than certainly gauging some of the comments that we're getting, which is a lot of concern maybe about the lack of rumours more than anything else. Obviously, work is ongoing behind the scenes, as you said. We have had links on these two positions. It's not like it's gone completely quiet. Norman is obviously still live. So, what's your feeling? Do you think they'll get the two that they're after come Wednesday morning?
I think they will definitely get one. I think, given that it's a defensive midfielder, that they will, if they have to, spend that bit more money to get the deal done. That's where they'll do it. And that Omobamidele and Zimmerman, given they're both fit at the moment, Zimmerman was all right the other night as well, wasn't he? Again, with the context of Bournemouth being pretty poor. I think, given that Sorensen can play centre back as well, and that if you're bringing in a defensive midfielder, and Farke has generally shown that he's happy to move defensive midfielders back in an emergency, that if they can't get a centre back that they're happy with, then I don't think that they'll force that one through as much as the defensive midfielder. I think that's the one where really you've got to get the deal done. You've got to make another solid defensive addition. But if they can get them both, of course they will, because I'm sure they'll be haunted by, as I think I said in this video a week ago, if the 20 minutes into the game at Arsenal after the transfer windows close, after the international break, Grant Hanley's hamstring goes, you're going to have a lot of egg on your face if you haven't got another centre back competing, and that you've then got a 19-year-old lad and Christoph Zimmermann who's had plenty of fitness issues in the last 2 years. So I think defensive midfield is the priority, and I think they will get one of the two, and it's got to be the midfielder. So I wouldn't be 100% surprised if the centre-back didn't turn up, but we shall see.
I've got a sneaky feeling we may be waiting until deadline day for one. That, of course, is what Norwich City have done so far in the market. Been very, very busy, very busy. I think that's fair to say, both incomings and outgoing. So let's reflect on a couple that have departed the club this week then, Dave. Let's start with Jordan Hugill, because that's probably the one that's perhaps a bit more relevant to Norwich City's first team. He was involved in the group last year. Tom Trybull obviously wasn't. So we'll start with Jordan Hugill, loan to West Brom. I think this is a very good move for all parties, really. When you look at how Valérien Ismaël played at Barnsley last year, Daryl Dike was deployed in kind of this big target man role, willing runner, chased everyone down, was relentless. Jordan Hugill, certainly off the ball, is the way he presses is tremendous, really. I don't think we probably got to see the best of that at Norwich last year, mainly because of the system and what he played under 700 minutes, which probably isn't a massive amount of football to really judge a player in. Plus, you could probably argue about styles of play and whether he fully, truly fitted into what Norwich City want from a striker. But West Brom does seem like a good fit, and certainly from the quotes we've seen from him so far, he seems very happy to turn up there.
Yeah, funnily enough, I'd just written up Farke's quotes on Hugill, and the opening paragraph is, "My fingers are definitely crossed for Jordan. I've spoken about how much I really love his personality and love this lad." And that's a big thing, is that he was a big personality in the dressing room, definitely played into the positivity. Farke spoke about him and Gibson in particular, sort of brought the banter almost, didn't they, at the start of last season, helped with that fresh feeling of a new squad and knitted everybody together really well. And that side of things, he definitely ticked the box. On the pitch, I don't think you can judge him too harshly because of the injuries, but he never really built up too much momentum, did he? There were a few games where he certainly played his part. Scored 2 against Bristol City. The penalty at Rotherham, of course, was a crucial goal, wasn't it? I mean, 96th minute or whatever it was. And yeah, he played his part, a bit like Jordan Rhodes 2 seasons before, really. He filled that role, but just technique-wise, he never really seemed to fit the Farke model, really. His control and things wasn't quite up to standard. And I think that'll be a really good move for him. When Ismail started doing well with Barnsley, people started noticing, didn't they? And started talking about, oh, that guy's doing well at Barnsley. I never heard of him before. And then they actually watched the football and realised that it's pretty agricultural. It's Allardyce hoofball style, to be perfectly honest, mixed with a bit of Jurgen Klopp gegenpressing, isn't it? It's a bit chaotic, and they did it well, but it's not pretty football. And it'll get West Brom back to the Premier League, I would dare say. And if Hugill stays fit, I think he'll probably do a very similar job. Hopefully have a few more goals in there, because it'll suit his style a bit more, and he'll be getting more crosses into the box and more free kicks and things like that. And what was that quote? Was it from Alex Neil, who said that he's like a hurricane? He just causes chaos all around him. We never really got to see that, because Norwich don't go for chaos, do they? It's more a defined, definite build-up, looking for that right opportunity, relying on being good players. And but I hope it goes well for him. And without wanting to put a negative slant on things, he's still under contract. If Norwich were to go back down next year, he's a good guy to bring back into the squad if you're relegated, if you want to be perfectly frank about things. But if Norwich stay up, yeah, he'll be moved on permanently next summer, you would have thought.
Yeah, but particularly if he has another promotion on his CV, that would be tremendous, wouldn't it? In terms of character, again, without trying to get too bleak on it. If Norwich do find themselves back in the Championship, as proven last season, I think he's exactly the right sort of character that you'd want around the place. And I think it's probably fair to say that if that move hadn't materialised and Jordan Hugill was still here after Tuesday, that I don't think Norwich would have been too disappointed, just because of what he gives you around the dressing room. Very popular. I think we've seen that from the messages. Not one that would have thrown his toys out of the pram by any stretch. So yeah, we wish Jordan all the best. I think he seems to be a good lad, seems to be popular in the dressing room, and no doubt that he'll score plenty of goals in the Championship. There's a question here along the lines of Tom Trybull, which I wanted to come to. I may have missed it. I'll try and find it whilst we speak about Tom. He's obviously his kind of contract was mutually terminated yesterday. He's subsequently gone to join Hanover today. The question was, which I seem to have lost, was essentially asking why Norwich have kind of let him go for free when potentially there was a fee to get for him. May be able to flash it up at some point. Hopefully Tony can find it for us. It's an interesting one with Trybull, isn't it? Because we saw him play such a significant role in Norwich's first title win under Daniel Farke, who's obviously been here since Daniel Farke joined the club. Certainly one of the first additions that he made. Always there we go. That's the question from Alex. It was always kind of neat and tidy with him. Obviously went on loan to Blackburn last season. He was one of the three, wasn't he, that Norwich kind of maybe moved away from in terms of players. It was him, Dermich and Leitner that were kind of cast aside as they went into a new direction. So this was probably inevitable to some stretch. But in terms of that question that Alex is asking there, is he someone that you think they could have got a fee for if they'd have held on a little bit longer? Do you think there's kind of a goodwill element to that agreement?
Well, possibly, but you can't forget the wages. I mean, what's he going to have been on in the Premier League? I don't know whether his wage will have gone up because he didn't play last season, but say he's on 20 grand a week, which seems reasonable. You're saving £1 million, aren't you, by getting rid of him? So it's going to be somewhere around that region, maybe a bit less, a bit more, potentially. So that is probably the main thing that they'll be worried about at the moment, is that money then goes into the pot for trying to get your defensive midfielder, your new one for the future, doesn't it? And yeah, maybe if you'd have really hung around, you might have got $250,000 for him, but it wasn't going to make a massive difference to what Norwich are trying to do at the moment. So I think the bigger thing was that they had a lot of this hanging around, didn't they? A lot of these players still on the books and just in the background, which wasn't a great noise, Dermich, Leitner, Closer, whoever, not necessarily causing problems or anything in the background, but it was kind of like an overshadow from the previous failure, wasn't it? And it's still linked to the club. And once Norwich were promoted, as Daniel framed it today, really, it no longer became a difficult decision or a difficult conversation with Tom, because he knew he wasn't going to come back into it in the Premier League. If they were still in the Championship, maybe so. He would have come back in for the final year of his contract. But it was pretty straightforward. And this works for everyone, doesn't it? There's this lovely little quote from the Hanover sporting director that he's mastered the English tackle, which caught my eye straight away. And Tom put up a really nice Instagram post as well, didn't he? So I'm sure it's like Stiepermann and Leitner and Closer. I guess when he does go, you'd have thought that something will be sorted with Closer as well, maybe even before the deadline. I saw on Insta that he was on a flight back to Switzerland the other day, wasn't he? So all the Norwich fans will wish those guys well and really hope that they manage to go and have a bit more fun in their career before they move into their sort of mid-30s and things like that. Because they were such big parts of a new regime that was so successful in 2018-19, and they all played really major parts. And Trybull was, I remember when he first signed, and was it the Arsenal game, the League Cup game, or it might have been the round before at Brentford, actually. And Farke made that joke, didn't he, that I don't want to big him up too much because I don't want Arsenal or Chelsea to know about him or anything. And he really came in as a force in that first season before injury pegged him back a bit and stuff, and was always seemed a really good character and things like that. So yeah, he goes to Hanover, Bundesliga 2, gets his career moving in the right direction, and I think everyone probably sort of shakes hands and goes their separate ways.
Yeah, it's two Germans left now, Lucas Rupp and Christoph Zimmermann from that first wave that we saw. So that might be a chant that has to be retired for now. Onel Hernandez, if you technically want to include him. And we will come on to him now, actually, because there was it was you that asked Daniel about his situation today in the press conference. He obviously hasn't been involved in any of the free match day squads that we've seen so far. He obviously was one of the players affected by the COVID outbreak at the club. Daniel kind of listed that as a reason, but there was an interesting bit at the end of his answer to your question, which sort of suggested that the door was open to an offer, either a loan or a permanent before the window closed on Tuesday. I'm sure a lot of Championship clubs would have been their ears would have pricked up to an extent.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because right from back in May, we'd been reporting that him and Boyheta could potentially leave, but Boyheta seems to have, because he's had this COVID situation and it's dragged on for him for a while, he's struggled to get fit again. That's probably meant that they're not going to get him a loan or any type of move, because nobody's probably going to be willing to take a punt on him at the moment. Whereas Hernandez hasn't struggled as much. He has been training in recent weeks, hasn't he? You've seen him in all the photos looking like he's having good fun and he's being Onel. He's one of the chirpiest football players you could ever meet. I remember going to the boxing gym in Norwich when it was before Sam Sexton's big fight. He had the British heavyweight title fight a few years ago, and it was Onel and Christoph Zimmermann and Louis Thompson doing boxing and sparring and things like that. And Onel absolutely loved it. It was before he was speaking, before his English was particularly fluent, and he needed Christoph Zimmermann as sort of a translator. It was one of the weirder interviews that I ever did. Zimmermann sweating profusely from the boxing that they'd done, and that was good fun. But all the stuff with Argos and things like that. He's such a popular guy for his personality. The tattoo at the end of last season and all that sort of stuff. That again, he's one that, when it comes to an end, and it probably will sooner or later now, I think he's still got 2 years on his contract, hasn't he? But people will be sad to see him go, because he's such a nice guy and he's really made his mark here. And I don't think he'd necessarily want to go. So unless a move comes up which really does work for him, I would imagine that he's quite happy to sort of stay and fight for his place because he's happy at Norwich, isn't he? And he'll feel that he has still got something to offer. And I think if you put O'Neill in, he's not going to let you down, is he? He'll work hard. He's got the pace. He's got the skills. It's just he doesn't necessarily have the end product in the Premier League. So, yeah, one to monitor. If a bit like with Hugill, isn't it? If West Brom come in, it's a Valerian Ismail team straight away, makes sense. Off you go. Yeah, good loan move. If something that similarly fits Onel Hernandez really well, top end of Bundesliga 2, where it's going to suit his style or something, they'll do the deal, you would have thought, wouldn't you?
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to be interesting to see how the final few days develop. Of course, pinkin.com, the place to go. We'll have anything there as and when it breaks. We'll kind of end that section on transfers with a clip of Daniel Farke from his press conference today, giving a little bit of an update, and then we'll look ahead to tomorrow's game against Leicester. Here's City's head coach speaking earlier today.
Well, in general, it's our way never to comment any rumors or any names. We just announce business once business is done. We were quite open and transparent also about what we want to do. So want to strengthen also our defensive role. We've done this with Brandon Williams. We're still looking out for perhaps some additions for our defensive setup. I think it's quite important, necessary to stay awake till the window is closed, and we try to do some business, but I can't confirm anything at the moment that we will do something. So everything has to be right, and I pretty much trust our sporting director Stuart Webber, who has done a fantastic job, especially over the last weeks, also during this transfer window. So I'm pretty pleased with work, and I'm quite confident that also the last days will be quite successful in the way we want to be successful.
So are you looking defensive areas and midfield areas as well?
Yes, we will stay awake on each and every position. So if Cristiano changes his mind and wants to have experience at Norwich, we will also go for a striker, offensive player. But we made it quite clear that, especially also in our defensive area, so also holding midfielder position, that we are still in the market and will stay awake till the window is closed.
There you go. So that sums up the transfer. Where Norwich City are with transfers at the moment. Let's look ahead to the game against Leicester tomorrow then, Dave. Let's start with probably the two players that have been most spoken about by Norwich City fans this week after their performances on Tuesday. Josh Sargent and Christos Solis. A little bit of a blow to maybe their chances of starting tomorrow. Both slight doubts. Probably another debate about whether Daniel Farke would have started either of them anyway. But this probably now makes it extremely unlikely that any of them, either of them rather, start tomorrow. Would you agree with that? Is that kind of a fair assessment, do you think?
Sounds like it, unless it's a bit of kidology from Daniel to really throw Brendan Rodgers. But I don't think you tend to get a lot of that nowadays, do you? Because teams come out at 2 o'clock and teams are so well prepared. They have all the analysts and things like that. I think you do pretty well to pull one over your opponents with an hour's notice, wouldn't they? They'd have an analyst straight away into, if it's going to be Solis, then they'd be speaking to Ricardo Pereira, wouldn't they? Saying, right, this is what you've got to watch out for. That they would be on it pretty quickly, and that teams are so well prepared nowadays. I don't think you tend to get too much of managers trying to throw people off the scent. And from our experience with Daniel, he generally doesn't do things like that, does he? If he says a player's a doubt, then we can probably assume that they're going to be on the bench at best. Otherwise, he probably wouldn't say anything about it. But it's a shame. Sargent, a pain in the backside, quite literally, by the sounds of it, a glute strain, and calf problems for Solis. But nothing major. That was what Daniel was keen to stress. And I think they're both going to be involved tomorrow, aren't they? But it just is maybe an insight into Daniel's thinking in terms of this is the final game, and then he'll have an international break to work with quite a few of them and make his own plans and work with his coaches on what they're going to do for the games ahead, and whether we'll start to see the sort of new team almost come together from the Arsenal game onwards. With the caveat that there's going to be a lot of players away on international duty. And as you pointed out earlier, Josh Sargent's going to have like 48 hours to get back from Honduras, isn't he? So bench at absolute best at the Emirates for him, you would have thought, unless they can come to some agreement with the US to not play him for that third game. They probably can handle Honduras without him, you would have thought, wouldn't you? But we'll see how those sort of things work out. But it's a shame for both players because they were excellent on Tuesday. Sholis in particular. Sargent, I think, was a bit quiet in the first half, but was always a presence, and he always worked that Bournemouth back line, and his size definitely helps. His touch is good. But Sholis, I think Rashica must have been watching on a little bit nervously, and maybe even Todd Cantwell as well, because that role on the right hasn't necessarily looked to suit Todd down to the ground just yet, as it seemed like he's having to adjust his style a little bit to playing on the right of a 4-3-3. So as much as anything as well, that the fans are going to be desperate to see Sholis again, aren't they? Because he was excellent. He was really exciting to watch. And if he can produce anything like that in the Premier League, then he's going to be a bit of a star. And he's just at the beginning of it all. And what was it? There was a nice little line from Daniel today when he said he's a really nice young lad or something like that, wasn't it? I love working with him already, and just almost a quite paternal comment from Daniel that already this kid is making a big impact. And he's only been here, 3 weeks, something like that, less than 3 weeks maybe. So yeah, that's a little bit of a shame, but it's still so early, and we've got to remember that this is Leicester. This is still one of the top teams in the Premier League. And it's not like Daniel hasn't got anything to turn to. He has got options. He has got Cantwell, Dow, and Rashica, Pukki, of course, up front, Adam Eder. So he has got options going into a tough game that it's not like we could say Sholis would tear them apart. He's going to be up against, frankly, if he was playing, one of the best right backs in the Premier League in Ricardo Pereira.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a fair point. I wrote a whole piece on this this morning. I didn't really see either of them starting anyway. I think if you're Milo Rashica and you've just signed for a new club and you're getting dropped on the back of a 5-0 defeat to Manchester City, I think you're probably turning around and probably shrugging your shoulders and feeling a bit annoyed. Quite frankly, it's not, as Daniel Farke said last week, in fairness, it's not those games that are going to keep Norwich City in the Premier League. Probably remains to be seen whether Leicester are, but Norwich did extract 4 of their 21 points against Leicester last time they were in the Premier League. So who knows, could be a good possibility. I'll just give you some thinking time on this, Dave, and I'll ask you, I'm basically going to ask you about kind of the changes that you'd make tomorrow if you were Daniel Farke. I think in my head I probably imagine 2. So I'll see if we kind of agree. Let us know as well what changes, if you're watching this live, what changes you would make to the starting 11 that played against Manchester City. I think I can probably think of maybe 3 popular ones that we'll see. So let us know in the comments. We'll see how many we agree with. Dave, as we said, 10 changes in midweek. I think there's been some debate about how many Daniel Farke will make, if any, tomorrow, of course. How do you see him going about it? What changes do you think? I think probably Kenny McLean is the obvious one. Do you see any others beyond that?
I would play Williams, but I don't think Daniel will. I think, following on from what I've just said and what you just said there, I don't think he'll want to sort of snub Giannoulis in that way. I think he'll feel that that's too harsh on the back of the most difficult game you're going to have all season, Manchester City away, probably. I think that he will probably feel that leaving Giannoulis out would be quite shattering for his confidence and would maybe leave him thinking, I've done all of this to get to the Premier League. I've moved over from Greece. I went to the Championship. The sort of master plan was in place, wasn't it? To be dropped so swiftly for someone who was signed on Monday just doesn't feel very Daniel Farke to me. I think he's more likely to give Giannoulis an opportunity and hope that it goes well. And then over the international break, he's got time to really think about it. And then you've got a real battle going on. Because I think from what we've seen so far, and probably even before Williams was actually signed, my feeling was that Williams was probably going to become the left back now. It's just a case of maybe when rather than if. So, yeah, from 4 seasons of watching Daniel Farke closely, I've got a feeling that he'll probably stick with Giannoulis at left back. But yeah, Kenny McLean comes in for Lucas Rupp, I think, almost certainly. And as I said it earlier, I did wonder whether maybe McLean will be the deeper of the 3, and he'll just free up Gilmour a little bit to be to his left, because that's where McLean has quite often played for Scotland, and those raking deep balls against Bournemouth, they worked nicely, and he looked full of energy and full of sort of pep, really, didn't he? So it'll be interesting, but yeah, I don't see Daniel making sweeping changes.
No, me neither. I think they're probably the only two I could see. I think you raise a good point about Williams. There is maybe he could make a better argument to him if this is the way that he was going to go and he was going to start Giannoulis tomorrow. Maybe he can make a better case to Williams and to say, look, well, obviously at the moment Williams is going to be at Colney for the 2 weeks. He's only on the standby list, so if he doesn't get called into the England under-21 group, then he essentially has 2 weeks to work with him, doesn't he, ahead of that Arsenal game. Giannoulis is going to be away with Greece. He could probably say, well, look, you've been out of the building. Williams has been in the building. That maybe perhaps is the moment where we might see Williams overtake Giannoulis a little bit. I could still see him starting Williams tomorrow, to be honest. I think those are probably the only two changes I see him making. I don't think he'll go for sweeping changes and we'll suddenly see Josh Sargent for Teemu. Although I'm almost certain we won't see Josh Sargent for Teemu Pukki tomorrow from the quotes that he gave on Teemu today, which were quite interesting, really, because there's been some small, probably I'd say, number of people talking about Pukki and the direction maybe of where Norwich want to go in terms of it looks like they're setting up to be a bit more of a counter-attacking side. Rashica certainly looks more of a natural winger than probably Buendia and Cantwell did last season, where they both look to come inside and try and create those chances. What do you make of that Pukki situation and how that will evolve? He's obviously had a very, very disjointed pre-season, more so than maybe the vast majority of the other Norwich players, with the exception of Grant Hanley, perhaps. Hasn't quite looked on it, has he, in the opening 2 games? But as Daniel said, those 2 games were probably important for getting fitness in his legs.
No, yes, that physical element of it with Pukki, isn't it? And I'll just, as I say, I would start Williams, and because it's Leicester and Arsenal, I'd be starting Williams because he's got over 50 appearances in the Premier League, and Giannoulis has played twice. Although he's a Greece international and all that comes with that. So, yeah, with Pukki, I mean, if they're going to play more of a counter-attacking style, which is what they did in the first half, I think that'll suit him quite nicely as long as the passes are going into the channels, which is what he wants, and as long as he's got someone actually trying to find him, which is easier said than done against Liverpool and Manchester City. But Cantwell did put him through against Liverpool at 0-0, didn't he? He should have squared to Rashica rather than had a shot, but even the shot wasn't Pukki standard, really, was it? It was classic Teemu in terms of if he's got time to think about it, he generally takes the wrong option. If he's just on his instincts, he'll bury it. I'm in no way writing off Teemu Pukki yet. I wonder whether he might go away with Finland. He's still only 2 away from the record, isn't he? And if he gets that during the break, then all of a sudden he's going to be revitalised, isn't he? From Jari Litmanen's record for Finland. I wonder whether that might be a little narrative that plays out. But we know that Daniel Farke loves Teemu Pukki, understandably, for everything that he's done in his 3 seasons at the club. It has been phenomenal, and I would question any Norwich fans that would turn on him so quickly. But you do have to be ruthless. Daniel spoke about, when we were talking about Trybull and Hugill today, about you can't be too romantic. If you want to survive in the Premier League, you have got to be ruthless. And if Josh Sargent proves to be the better option, then he's got to be the starting option. If Brandon Williams proves to be better than Dimitris Giannoulis as a starting option, then he has to start as well, doesn't he? You've got to go for the best team that gives you the best chance of staying up. But as ever with Teemu and with most strikers, once he's got 1 goal, he'll probably be away and he'll go on a little patch and a little hot streak, won't he? So let's hope that starts tomorrow nice and early.
Yeah, fingers crossed. Leicester having a somewhat of a defensive injury crisis at the moment. They're going to be without Yannick Vestergaard and Johnny Evans tomorrow. Looks like Daniel Amati is going to be partnering Soyuncu as well, which is what he's done in the first 2 games of the season. Primarily, he's more of a defensive midfielder, yeah, but can play centre back. Has played centre back before, but not probably the first choice. So maybe that's going to be an area of weakness. Ryan Bertrand set to return for Leicester as well tomorrow. So that may free up Pereira to play in a more advanced role in right midfield, as I think he's done on a couple of occasions last season. So we shall see. This is an interesting one from Will. He simply put Dowell ? And he's not someone who's been spoken about a lot this season, or kind of when we've been talking about 11s and what Daniel might do. I haven't seen a great deal of people suggest that Kieran Dowell could come into the starting lineup. I thought he was pretty good on Tuesday. I think he faded a little bit in the second half, to be completely honest, but did have a hand in a couple of the goals. where do you kind of see him fitting in this season? I certainly probably wouldn't expect him to start tomorrow, but still seems very much in the plans.
Yeah, as things stand, it feels like he's a top championship player, and we need to see whether he can make that step. But unless he's playing regularly, it's going to be difficult. And I don't think the shape's going to help him particularly. The 4-3-3, if it's not really working for Campbell, then I don't think it's really going to work for him. That if they're not going to have a sort of a number 10, I'm not really sure where Kieran fits in, because I think he's a lovely footballer. And if he'd have been fit all of last season, I think he could well have had a much more high profile season, because the final 10 matches we really saw what he could do, and he is too good for the championship when he's on his day and he's on top form. But physically, that is the big thing that often gets overlooked with the Premier League. Obviously the step up in quality is vast from the championship, but the step up in athletes is there as well. Everybody is big and fast, and Dow maybe hasn't shown that he's got that sort of dynamism to his game where you could play him as a sort of an out winger. But I don't know. I think that there is a lot of quality there. There's a lot of technique. There's definitely a Daniel Farke player in there, but maybe he's going to have to learn a new role. He's going to have to adapt in some way. And if he gets his opportunity in the league, he's really going to have to take it, because at the moment it doesn't feel like he's going to get a great deal of opportunities. But yeah, I wouldn't be writing off Dow yet, because he's got a great free kick in his locker, isn't he? He's got a very good left foot. He might just come up trumps at the right time and get a run in the team, but he's going to have to be flexible, it seems, if Daniel's not going to be playing a number 10.
Yeah, he had to be patient last season, didn't he? Although he had that injury which knocked him back a little bit. Like you said there, I just wonder if the set pieces at some point may become quite relevant if Norwich are in search for a goal. But it only takes one moment, doesn't it, to burst onto the scene and get a run in the team. So we shall see. We've had all of our changes from the viewers. So we'll ask them now for the score prediction. We'll kind of turn to that side as we look to close it in the next 2 minutes or so, Dave. How do you see this game going tomorrow? It's a different proposition to Liverpool and Manchester City, but worth noting that Leicester are still, in Premier League terms, a force, really. They were just outside the Champions League places last season. I've seen them earlier today, certainly in betting odds, be placed as the favourites to win the Europa League. So this isn't a favourable game in terms of Norwich City being favourites or anything like that. So how do you see it kind of playing out?
Yeah, they're an excellent team. I've seen a few 1-1s flash through there, and that's where my head was going.
3 1-1s. 3 or 4 comments.
I think everybody would be happy with that at the moment. That would build things very nicely, wouldn't it? And even 2-2 would be nice, but that's another 2 goals conceded. I think the big thing tomorrow is, even if they don't win, you've got to see some growth, and you'd hope that the momentum of Tuesday will play a big part in that, and that they're going to go out on that pitch and not be dragged down by the 5-0 against Manchester City. They hopefully are going to be full of motivation to really prove themselves that they do belong at this level. They've had the absolute tripe that they've heard from TalkSport this week, which we've covered to some extent, but tried to not get too bogged down in it, because it is just a load of rubbish, really, isn't it? And they were clearly just trying to stir a reaction, and that's exactly what they got. That's kind of what they're professionals at doing, isn't it? So yeah, I really hope they come out fired up, looking to show that they are in this Premier League, that they've got a foothold, because if they were to slump to another 3-0 defeat, it's going to be very difficult for people to not be fretting and worrying through that international break, knowing that it's Arsenal to come, and Aubameyang's just turned up again, hasn't he, in the cup. And then, as we've talked about a little bit on the podcast, the Watford game looms larger and larger, doesn't it? That becomes a game that you've got to win. So anything they can get out tomorrow in terms of points would be great. But as long as we see an encouraging performance, more steel in defence, then hopefully we'll have some positives to build on. But of course, they are capable of winning this game. We've seen that. They were the deserved championship champions with 97 points, as Daniel was talking about the other day. If Leicester are just a bit off their game and Norwich turn up, they can definitely beat them.
Yeah, if Leicester play anything like they did on Monday night against West Ham, then then there's certainly potential for Norwich City tomorrow. We will be at Carrow Road, of course. We'll be live on all of our socials, all of our social channels at 2:00 for the team news. Dave will be on the live blog as well. We'll have all our usual service, pinkin.com. Of course, the place to go for all the Norwich City news and views as well. Daniel Farke's thoughts on there from today's press conference as well. Dave, thank you very much for joining me. Thank you all very much for watching. I hope you enjoy the rest of your Friday evenings, and we'll see you again very soon.